markets on this Friday, the 25th day of July. As we've talked about all week, today was a big report day with USDA as far as the cattle go. We'll get into looking at all of those numbers here shortly, but before we do that, a lot of green grass out there, and there's several special cow sales coming up. If anybody's looking for some high-quality fall calving or some spring cows or heifers, sure going to have several of them offered at a few locations over the next week or so. The first sales tomorrow at Wheeler Livestock Auction in Osceola. They've got 1,050 head. That sale will start at 4 p.m. Next Thursday, Joplin Regional Stockyards. They're expecting about 700 head Thursday evening. They'll start at 4:30. And then next Saturday, August the 2nd, 1 p.m., just right after lunch, they've got about 1,250 head there. Taking a look at those reports that were published today, we'll start off with the inventory report and just try to recap that just slightly. Most all the classes that were looked at there, not quite as low as what pre-report estimates had called for them. Of course, we have to look back to 2 years since we've had a July inventory report. So although those numbers weren't larger, they weren't as small as expected. It could hint at just a touch of starting to turn the quarter and maybe growing just slightly. Probably the thing that stuck out to me there was that if there is some growth happening, it's probably with more of a retaining cows a touch longer. And of course, we know that cow slaughter's been cut extremely low this year. So with all the grass and stuff, it's likely most producers are holding those cows for another calf or so. Turning our attention to the cattle and feed report, this report probably had a few surprises today, mainly being that placement number that we watched so close. The on-feed number, it was slightly lower than the pre-report average at 98.4%. The average prior to the report was 99.1. Marketings were slightly lower than the pre-report estimate, 95.5% of last year's where they come in. The expectation was 96.1. When we talk about that placement number, pre-report, they were expecting it to be at 98.1% of last year. That number was a bit scary at first, as last year's June placements were some of the lowest on record, but when that number came in, it came in at 92.1%. That was the lowest June placements since June of 2009, and I heard from some people they thought it was probably likely the lowest June placements ever on record. Now, when we look at some of the previous months, we haven't had any big months of placements leading up to this, so we know the calves are out there. And if we stop and think for a minute, they're all out there on grass, just not headed to the feed lots yet. They will eventually have to come, of course, but it's just very likely that they're going to come at much heavier weights and not spend as many days in the feed lots. Taking a look at some of the stick-out sales this week from around the state at the auction barns. Of course, a very light week this week. Going to be just shy of 15,000 head through the sale barns, and that's almost unheard of on a non-holiday week, but we always have a week or two every year where that extreme heat sets in, and this seemed to be that week this year, hopefully the only one we have. Despite the lower numbers, the cattle market's still extremely strong. When we look at the feeder cattle index based on an 800-pound steer up through the 12-state feeding region, it set an all-time record high on Friday at 328.83. That's a touch surprising given that we're a couple weeks out of all those giant special barbecue and holiday fireworks sales around the 4th of July when we see all the really fancy reputation cattle coming. It wouldn't have surprised anyone if that number might have dropped just a touch due to quality, but that sure has not been the case. It's just continued to climb at nearly every auction. Some of those stick-out sales this week, it was extremely hard to find any drafts over 20 head of lightweight calves. They just pretty much did not exist anywhere this week. The drafts that come in were all very small odds and ends, but that being said, they still sold extremely well. 29 head of 548-pound steers at Joplin sold at $415. The statewide weighted average price on those light 5 weights still well above $4 at $410. Unionville Livestock Market sold 83 head of 602-pound steers this week for $416.25. When we talk 6 to 650-pound steers and drafts over 20 head, that would be the highest price draft of any light 6 weights that's ever sold in the state of Missouri, reported by USDA. A load of 758-pound steers at Callaway this week sold at $368.78. The average statewide on the heavy 7-weight steers, $345. Kingsville Livestock Auction, they sold a load of 824-pound steers at $334.75. Unionville Livestock Market, they had 5 loads of those Rockin' R steers this week, heavy 8 weights weighing 864 to 888, and they sold from $326.75 to $328.75. Joplin Regional Stockyards sold a load of 909-pound steers at $317. Then they had 2 loads of 1,035-pound steers that brought $305.50. Taking a look at the heifers, kind of the same story on the light heifer calves. Hard to find any big drafts of them this week. 28 head of 545-pound heifers at Joplin sold at $380. The average statewide on those light 5-weight heifers, $369. Then some 7-weight heifers, a load of 734-pound heifers at F&T Livestock Market in Palmyra, $344.75. The average statewide for the light 5-weight heifers now at $320. Another notable thing that was shared with me this week from one of the market reporters sitting in the barns every day. They went to one of their auctions. Light run there, only about 500 head, but he said when he walked in the barn, you would have thought they was going to have 3,500 head. Said every buyer that had ever been at the barn was sitting at the barn. They're just eager to get cattle bought. It's extremely hard to put together any loads or fill any orders with the very light receipts that have occurred the last couple of weeks. Taking a look at box beef cutout values, choice $366.68. That's down $6.87 since last week. Select $344.87. That was down $6.67 from last week. If there's anything that might be a negative, it could be good, of course, for the consumer. But that choice box beef has lost $30 since the end of June. Selected's down nearly $40 since the end of June. Feedlot trade, of course, we didn't expect much to happen this week until we got through those 2 reports this afternoon. And as of the 2 o'clock cutoff time, only about 20,000 head had sold. So there's definitely some more trade that took place after that today. Texas reported 2,545 head. Kansas, 2,410 head. Sales there were mostly steady with last week, mostly around that 230, 231 mark. Iowa reported 7,350 head. The live sales there from 235 to 242, mostly around 240. Dress sales 375 to 382, mostly 378 to 380. Nebraska reported 4,592 head, 240 to 242 live. Dress sales from 376 to 382, mostly at 380. So those 20,000 head that sold so far, mostly a steady market with last week. We'll have to wait till Monday to see if any of those feedlot managers that held out were able to get any more money out of the packers or not, or if the packers were able to hold their ground at steady money for the week. Taking a look at the futures markets, on the livestock side for the week, live cattle were $292 to $438 higher. The August lean hog contract was up $2.23. The other further out contracts 2 cents to 55 lower. Feeder cattle $737 to $897 higher for the week. The closes on Friday, August live cattle 67 higher, 226.47. October at 223.15 up $1. December 223.47 up 82. August feeder cattle 331.37 up 247. September 332.20 up 255. October at 331 up 265. Lean hogs for August, 108.70 up 50. October, 90.60 down 50. December, 82.25 down 67. Just to put a little more into perspective of where we are with the cattle markets, that August live cattle contract, of course, it has another month until it matures and expires. But when we were turning most of those cattle out on the Flint Hills back in May, that August was just barely bumping off of the $3 mark a few times that month. Now it's $30 higher. Turning our attention to the grain markets now, at the elevators around the state on Friday. The soybeans, the cash bids for the week were 14 to 42 cents lower, wheat 6 to 8 lower, corn 11 to 21 lower. Those grain markets just can't seem to outrun the fact that everybody's expecting bumper crops this year, even with rumors of some pollination issues with the corn, some issues of some areas just flat being too wet for soybeans. No matter what kind of news comes out, it just doesn't seem that anything can outweigh the feeling of those potential bumper crops that are waiting in the fields to be harvested shortly. The cash grain bids on Friday for corn in the St. Louis area, 429, Kansas City 421. A lot of the elevators now below the $4 mark for any old crop brought to town now. Soybeans, St. Louis 1020 to 1021, Kansas City 1021 to 1041. Wheat bids in St. Louis 511 to 513, Kansas City at 523. Taking a look at the futures markets for the week, soybeans were 12 to 29 lower, wheat 8 to 9 lower, corn 8 to 9 lower, soybean meal 620 to 730 lower. On the board of trade on Friday, September corn down 2 1/4, 399.5. December 419 down 1 3/4. March at 436.5 down 1 3/4. August soybeans dropped below the $10 mark, 998 3/4. That was down 5.5 for the day. September at 1002 down 3 3/4. November at 1021 down 3 1/4. Wheat for September, 538 1/4, down 3 1/4. December 558 1/4, down 3. March at 576 3/4, down 3. Soybean meal for August down $1.90 a ton, 267.80. Soybean oil for August, 56.49 a hundredweight, down 18 cents. With the Missouri Department of Agriculture, that's a recap of all your markets for this week.